There are nights when I count myself lucky. In fact, if I'm honest, I usually do. But sometimes, lucky takes on a strange shape. It was 3 a.m. The world was quiet. The Sunday sun, not even a rumor on the horizon yet. And then my phone rang, a call from an ex-girlfriend, someone I still care about, someone who, even after everything, can still reach out in the dark. Her voice, shaken, tired, carrying that blend of anger and helplessness only a parent knows. Her 16-year-old son, just as old as my own former stepson, had tried to play Superman. The kind of stunt you only hear about when the police bring your kid home and say, "You're lucky we found him. He tried to stop a train. They managed to stop him just in time." Now she needed someone to look after him, someone he might still listen to. Because let's be honest, the official systems don't show up at 3 a.m., not unless you've got deep pockets or endless patience. Not when the problem is urgent and the budgets are long gone. So I was in the car. No hesitation. An hour on the road. Headlights cutting through the empty night. By the time I got there, he was quiet. Small in a way only a teenager can be when the world finally catches up to them. I took him home with me. We talked. Or better said, he talked, because I listened. That's what I do. Sometimes it's the only thing that helps. The story unfolded. Months of eating badly, bouncing between mom and dad. A father who gets angry, sometimes for a reason, sometimes for none. Exam stress piling up, weeks on end without a sober day, or a full night's sleep, drifting from one party to the next, every day blurring into the next. Weed. Joints. A haze so thick you forget what clear air tastes like. Up at 3 p.m. Tired, irritable, furious at the world. At your mom, your dad, your little sister, and naturally, the new man in your mom's life. Who does he think he is, telling you anything? Meanwhile, the hormones are raging. The wrong kind, the dangerous ones. And then you find a bag of weed, laced with something you can't even name. That's how the chain reaction starts. Not just because of the weed, but because of everything. The mess, the chaos, the loneliness you can't admit to anyone, not even yourself. Mom knows you smoke, suspects you drink, probably figures you're high more often than not, but you can't prove it. And Dad? You hide it all from him. Because what if he found out? What if he really saw what was going on? And somewhere in all that chaos, between the late nights, the haze, the silent anger, and all the things nobody dared to say, one question kept circling in my mind. What does he really want? What do any of us want? Especially at 16, when everything feels out of control. The more I listened, the more I realized. This wasn't about bad choices or bad friends or broken trust between parents. This was about being seen, not just noticed, but really, truly seen. That became clear during those first 8 days together. It's easy for parents, teachers, and so-called experts to point out the obvious. The smoking, the skipping class, the endless parties, the missed chances. But it's so much harder to look beneath the mess and see the person underneath. The part that's scared, the part that's lost, the part that just wants to know they matter. So that's what I tried to do. Create space, show patience, and offer him the kind of attention that doesn't rush into fix, but simply listens. No lectures, no advice, just listening. And once the panic settled a little, I gently challenged him. Have you ever really asked your parents if they see you? Not just what you do, but who you actually are. He hesitated, uncertain. But a few days later, he found the courage to call his dad and asked the question. His father answered the way most adults do. "Of course I see you. You're smart. You just need to apply yourself. You're talented at this. You could work harder at that." The usual checklist. But then, with more courage than most adults ever find, this 16-year-old asked again, "No, Dad, I mean, do you see me? Do you see who I am? As a person?" There was a long silence, and in that quiet, you could almost hear everything his father wanted to say, but never found the words for. Then slowly, the dam broke. His dad started to talk, not about grades or chores, but about the real stuff. The way his son is always there for his friends, how much kindness he sees when nobody else is watching, the loyalty, the laughter, the deep down goodness that can't be measured or put on a report card. There were tears, raw words, and a lot of fumbling. But for the first time in years, this kid heard what he'd always needed. Not approval, not criticism, just to be seen, really seen for who he is. And that changed everything. Not because the world suddenly got easier or all the problems disappeared, but because something real passed between them. The hiding, the anger, the chaos, they didn't vanish, but they lost their grip. That was the turning point. Not a perfect ending, but the first real step toward coming home to himself. Because when you are truly seen, you finally start to believe that you matter. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. We spent 8 days together, and he went back home. Not because he wanted to, but because his parents felt they needed to look at other options first. See if a different setting, a new program, or some professional support might help. I understood their hope, their doubt, their instinct to keep searching for that one magic fix. And so he went. Quiet, polite, but with a heaviness you can't miss if you've ever seen a young person say goodbye before they're ready. I didn't know what would come next. We didn't keep constant contact. There was no daily check-in, no heroics, just the memory of those long, honest nights together, and the hope that what had shifted between us might survive whatever came next. He disappeared back into his world, and I stepped back into mine. But something had changed, because not long after, he made it clear, first to himself, then to his parents, and finally to me, that he wanted to come back. Not because life had suddenly improved, not because all his problems were solved, but because for the first time in a long time, he'd felt safe enough to want to try again, to be in a place where he could just be himself. It took a bit of time, and his parents needed to process their own ideas about what the right path was. But when the moment was right, he returned. 4 weeks this time. A new chapter. His choice. What happened in those 4 weeks? How the old patterns slowly unraveled. How he began to show up for himself. How a kid who thought he was lost started to believe in small steps forward again. That's the story I'll share next. For now, let me just say this. Real change rarely arrives on a schedule, and almost never because someone else forced it. It happens when a person is ready, when they know they'll be seen, not as a problem, but as a whole person. Sometimes that's enough to begin again. And when it is, you notice it. Not because the world suddenly gets easier, but because someone finally says, "I want to be here." What happened in those 4 weeks? How old habits slowly lost their grip? How he started to show up for himself and the people around him? That's a story for another time. But I will say this. Now, months later, he hasn't touched weed, rarely drinks, and is at the gym every day. He cooks his own meals, sometimes even for his parents. The change is real, and he's the one making it happen. But I'll share more about that in the next chapter. For now, just know, when someone finally feels seen for who they are, the rest can start to fall into place.